what I'm going to do is try and understand some of the myths that have come about when we talk about software sustainability. And one of the things I wanted to do was try and understand, why do myths start? So in every myth, there is a grain of truth. And that grain of truth may be misheard, embellished, for all sorts of reasons. And I think that's true both when we talk about the modern day and when we talk about different types of software, as it was when we talk about things that happened thousands and thousands of years ago. So Alexander the Great, we all know who he is, or do we? When we look at other things, anyone seen the movie 300? No? Yes. You'll know there that the Spartans were famous for their reputation. Their reputation preceded them. So in that case, one Spartan was worth several men of any other state. And they managed to succeed by building a reputation and building a mythology around them that had a grain of truth in it. They certainly were fierce fighters, but was embellished by other people through misunderstanding, miscommunication, and misinterpretation, such that no one could really understand why it came about in the first place. Because really, the Spartans were men like anyone else. They simply created an image around them. So when we talk about software sustainability, what are the things that people misunderstand, misinterpret, and miscommunicate? And what was that grain of truth that we could have seen if we go right the way back to how they started? So I'm going to go through 5 different myths in this lecture, and I'm going to try and see where they came from, why they came about, and also head towards the end on a journey to discover what we can do to dispel these myths and actually get to the true meaning of software sustainability. So, my first myth: collecting software in repositories sustains it. This became very fashionable maybe 5 or 6 years ago. You ended up with an awful lot of things, a lot of repositories being created which really did just store software. Indeed, the first incarnations of OMII and OMII-UK were looking at just taking software and making it available again. So harvesting rather than cultivating software. And the problem is that preserving something, like the ancient mummies, is not the same thing as sustaining it. The Egyptian pharaohs, they thought that they could take their life through to the next stage, to heaven or to a higher plane. But the problem is that eternal decay is still decay. What we've got to understand is that just by preserving something as it is, it doesn't sustain it. And that's the same with software. There's often this idea that we're comparing apples and oranges. And one thing that's often asked is, well, if you can do things with libraries, books, and so on, why can't you do things with software? So you have things like Amazon, and you have things like download. So you can get the different objects from both things, from both websites, but can you truly compare them? Well, I think it's different. I think it really is more like comparing apples and books, not apples and oranges. Because when you look at the realities, you see that when you talk about books, a typical modern book printed on acid-free paper lasts for around about 50 years before it starts deteriorating. An apple, stored in a nitrogen-filled warehouse, lasts about 12 months. And indeed, if you buy an apple from a supermarket, it can quite often be about 8 to 9 months old. When you look at software, is software closer in its decay profile to a book or to an apple? I'll leave you to make your own assumptions there, but we have so many things changing. The environment that software runs in changes, operating systems change, drivers change, libraries change, compiler versions change. All of these things taken together means that the environment that software runs in never stays the same. It is this cycle of eternal change leading to eternal decay. But there is a grain of truth in there somewhere. And one of the things that is important when we look at this particular myth is that we do still need to understand how to produce reproducible research. So there are journals but still very few that demand the software is archived along with the research results. Because we do need to understand, if we have to come back to the research, how it was produced. And as increasingly software is used to produce the data sets, the analyses, the simulations, we need to understand how we got to that. So I'm not saying that the myth is completely, it's not the wrong way to go, but it's not the only thing. And I think that's the thing with many myths, is that there is that grain of truth there. There's also things that we can see like the Doomsday Project. Does anyone remember that? This was a wonderful attempt to recreate the Doomsday Book, which has been around for just coming up to 1,000 years. It's still readable, although not very accessible. Here they try to do the opposite. They try to recreate this collection of information from across the country and make it available to lots of different schools via a mechanism based on a BBC-B micro and a Laserdisc player. So that was in, I think, 1982, but by the next decade, the problem was that very few of the Laserdisc readers worked anymore, and the programs that were being run on the BBC-Bs still required a BBC-B to run them. However, there's quite a community that's built up now around understanding how to virtualize software and run it in different ways, either by converting to a newer language, so some software is converted to Java, for instance, and run in a Java virtual machine, or encapsulating and emulating the entirety of the hardware. And so we do have the ability to capture the data that might otherwise be lost and achieve this idea of reproducible research. So sustaining things in repositories is possible, but it requires thought. And it isn't the same as just collecting it and keeping it there. It's like, it's the difference between, and this is where anyone from the repository community here will probably hate me for this, the difference between putting something into a place of rest, which really a repository means, and putting it into a kind of a holiday home, so somewhere where people can continue to live their lives.